was too. I was. I'm not saying it's not good, but I was good. I thought it should just be up to the restaurants. And then they banned it, and I think that's okay. I don't listen to it takes long to make it up.
There might be some. Let me grab it.
Okay, right here. Let me go find our 10 guy.
Right there. Okay. I think we're good to go. You want to start?
Sign over there, but can we put those 3 seats on that?
That's for the speakers for the first panel when they leave.
Speakers? Excuse me, coming in.
Is there an acceptable way to do this sort of repair?
Quiet. Looks like the video are on.
Good afternoon, everyone. You are about as unruly as the convention floor. Good afternoon, everyone. On behalf of the International Republican Institute, welcome, ladies and gentlemen. We are delighted to have you join us today for our discussion, more important than ever, of the transatlantic relationship. Before we get underway, I want to make sure to say how proud we are to be bringing you this discussion in cooperation with our good friends of the delegation of the European Union to the U.S. and the European Parliament Liaison Office to the U.S. Congress, also known as EPLO. My personal thanks goes out to Ambassador O'Sullivan of the delegation and Antoine Ripoll from the EPLO, and of course their staffs, who I'm sure make them look better than they really are. But that's what good staff is all about. But it's great to see all of you here. It's interesting, before this convention, some months ago, as we were looking to put together a series of events, we thought we might have interest in foreign policy events. When you do the kind of work that we do, foreign policy is always more important to you than maybe to the general public. Not so much. Obviously, foreign policy discussions in recent weeks and recent months have moved to the forefront, not just in domestic politics, but transatlantic politics, both sides of the Atlantic, and the challenges, I think, will only increase the importance of the discussion that we're going to have. On Tuesday afternoon, in this very room, we heard from several important Republican foreign policy leaders. We had a panel here that featured Speaker Ryan and Governor Kasich, Senators Cotton, Perdue, and Ernst, Congressman Roscom. We had 2 retired generals. We had a very impressive array of leadership. Every single one had the same message. They talked about the extraordinary importance of American engagement and the importance of American leadership. Of course, at IRI, that is music to our ears. We agree wholeheartedly, but it's more than that. At IRI, we also want to emphasize that it's just as important that the U.S. and the EU demonstrate that leadership and engagement together. The world needs us to be working together, because together, only when we are together, can we be that global force for good, the way that we have been together in the aftermath of World War II and the Cold War. We must be force projection for hope for families on both sides of the Atlantic, doing work that lifts lives and strengthens communities and adds to security and stability. Now, let's be clear as we get together today. There is no denying that all of our societies, both in Europe and in America, are facing changes and challenges on a scale that we could not have foreseen just a few years ago. We see the rise of the far right and the far left anti-establishment movements and parties, which are bringing challenges to some of the institutions that so many of us have worked so hard for so long to create and secure. We've seen violent extremism, again, on both sides of the Atlantic. And recently we've seen the pace of that extremism accelerate. We've seen unresolved conflicts and unaddressed poverty in the Middle East and North Africa in ways that are creating a stream of refugees that at times are overwhelming to communities and to institutions. On top of all that, we still feel the effects of the financial and economic crises of nearly a decade ago. We see the reemergence of the Russian Federation with a new, obviously aggressive agenda, one that is clearly aimed at destabilizing NATO in the European Union. And if that weren't enough, famously on June 23rd, even the Union itself started a new path that won't be entirely predictable. Facing all of these challenges, facing any one of these challenges would be trying. Facing all of these challenges may at times seem daunting. But what makes the challenges less daunting and less formidable is that we do not face them alone. Working together across the Atlantic, shoulder to shoulder, we can learn from each other, we can strengthen each other, reapplying and reaffirming those values and principles that really created the foundation for our way of life. Bob Zoellick, former World Bank president and a strong transatlanticist, reminds us that history is full of trends and occurrences which today seem inevitable, but just a few years ago, not so much. We have to be working together to take on these challenges, recognizing that we do face tough choices, but we have always faced tough choices. Over the years, we have faced many crossroads moments with difficult choices. But despite all of that, as a community then and as a community now, I am confident that we will reemerge with an even stronger, renewed relationship. And perhaps if we buckle down and continue to focus on those shared values, perhaps not so far in the future, our children, just as we have so often done, will believe that our future success was always inevitable. Today we have two great panels for you. One to take a look at key issues in the transatlantic security relationship. That has gotten obviously a great deal of attention in recent weeks. And another to assess the current and future development of trade and economic issues. I'm delighted to see a full house. I hope you enjoy this part of the program as much as I know I will. Thanks again for joining us. I'll now turn the floor over to Jan Saracek and the first of our two panels today. Jan?
Thank you, Mark. So as Mark said, we are starting today with a discussion on this panel of the main issues in the transatlantic security relationship. We have really a phenomenal group of people here to do that today. When our friends at the delegation of the European Union in Washington came to us several months back with the idea of organizing this program, we jumped at the chance for all the reasons that Mark just indicated related to our commitment to the transatlantic relationship. So we're glad that you're all here today. I'll just do quick introductions, and then I'll ask our panelists to speak for 3 minutes or so, and then we'll take questions from the floor. So first, as our co-host today, Ambassador David O'Sullivan, the Ambassador of the European Union to the United States. Ambassador O'Sullivan was present at the creation of the European External Action Service, serving as its chief operating officer before being appointed here to Washington. Before that, he was head of Commission President Prodi's cabinet, Secretary General of the European Commission, and the Director General for Trade when the Union concluded its trade agreement with South Korea. Second, Dr. Sam Clovis, who is co-chair and senior foreign policy advisor of the Trump for President campaign. Sam is a retired United States Air Force colonel after having served 25 years in the United States Air Force, professor of economics at Morningside College in Iowa, former candidate for the Senate in the Republican primary in 2014, which Senator Joni Ernst, who was with us on Tuesday, ultimately won, and started this cycle as the Iowa director of the Rick Perry for President campaign before going to the Trump for President campaign in August of 2015. Jan Zahradil, member of the European Parliament from the Czech Republic and president of the Alliance of European Conservatives and Reformists, served as an MP for the Czech Republic from the Civic Democratic Party since the beginning of the Czech Republic's membership in the European Union, since 2004. Before that, a number of terms in the Czech National Assembly and the Federal Assembly of the Czech and Slovak Federative Republic before the split of Czechoslovakia. As I said, he is currently president of the Alliance of European Conservatives and Reformists, which is the party of now the third largest group in the European Parliament. In the Parliament, he is also a member of the Delegation for Relations with Turkey. So obviously a very busy man this last weekend. And perhaps, Jan, if there might be chance and questions, we could examine questions of the future of Turkey as well. And last but not least, Les Munson, former staff director for Senator Corker on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. Has behind him a 26-year career on Capitol Hill and in the administration. In his last 2 years as staff director at the committee, was deeply involved in a number of key pieces of legislation, not least of which the sanctions against the Russian Federation in response to its activities for its annexation of Crimea and its activities in the Donbass. Before that, he was chief of staff to Senator Mark Kirk, and before that with then Representative Kirk in the United States House of Representatives. He also served as Deputy Assistant Administrator at the United States Agency for International Development. So, with the introductions behind us, I will turn the microphone over to Ambassador O'Sullivan.
Well, thank you very much, Jan. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It's a great pleasure to be here. I'm going to use 1 minute of my 3 minutes just to say a few thank yous for organizing this great event. Firstly, to Mark Green for his excellent introduction, and to the IRI in general for the excellent cooperation we've had. We've really appreciated it. Yourself, Jan, Mary Foster, Jennifer Kroll, and the others. I'd also like to acknowledge the contribution of the European Parliament Office, Antoine. We're just delighted to have a number of distinguished members of the European Parliament here, both in the audience and on the panel, and of course so many American friends. The idea of this, and it is a huge privilege for those of us in the diplomatic community in Washington to be able to be present during these 2 exciting weeks here in Cleveland and then in Philadelphia. You're putting on the greatest piece of political theater in the world for us. Now, of course, it also has consequences, so it's not to be viewed purely as entertainment. But we did feel there was so much limelight being shed on the United States that we thought in Europe we'd create a little diversion and have Brexit just to claim our place in the sun. And no doubt we will come back to that. But in the delegation, we really did want to avail of this opportunity, of this very, very important moment in your political life, but also, frankly, for the rest of us as well, to have an event in each of the conventions to debate, to put transatlantic relations on the agenda, if I may say so. And we will have one here, one in Philadelphia, and then we'll have a follow-up event in D.C. In the autumn with the representatives of the new administration, whomever that may be. We're strictly nonpartisan. And also members of Congress to discuss how we can take transatlantic relations forward in the new political arrangements which will come into place in January. I just want to foreign policy is, of course, a major issue. One of the major themes being discussed here this week is the changing nature of the world, the fact that it's probably a more dangerous place now than it has been for many, many years. And some of the hopes we had for, if you like, a smoother transition after the collapse of communism, the collapse of the Soviet Union, the great optimism, the end of history, as Mr. Fukuyama famously said. It hasn't quite turned out the way we'd hoped, and it's proving challenging. We've identified a number of those challenges this week. Of course, you mentioned the situation of Russia in the East. We have the turmoil in the Middle East, with obviously the Syria being in the forefront of that, but frankly, all of the difficulties we know along the North African coast, the way in which that has impacted for many neighboring countries, but also for Europe in a refugee crisis. Unfortunately, also the issue of terrorism, the issue of ISIL, non-state actors, the changing nature of the threats that we face, which are not quite the conventional threats that we once knew. How we deal with this is a major topic of conversation here. Of course, I would also mention the situation in Asia, the South China Sea, hugely worrying for all of us. We all have a stake. You're a Pacific nation. We're not, but we have a stake in the prosperity and the success and the security of that region, just as I hope that Asia feels they have a stake in our transatlantic security. So I think these are all the challenges we face. You mentioned just what's happened in Turkey. It seems, frankly, every morning when you wake up and you open your iPad, you discover some new development, some new event that, frankly, doesn't seem to be full of good news. So I think we do face this challenging situation. And Mark was kind enough to mention the importance of the transatlantic relationship. But I think what has changed, ladies and gentlemen, is that whereas once agreement between the United States and Europe was a sufficient condition to move the dial on international relations, that is no longer the case. But I do still think it is a necessary condition. And I think that is something we must not lose sight of. If we are not able to agree and have a common position, it's going to be extremely difficult to bring the rest of the world with us. So we still have to work in that direction. There are very good success stories, one which I know you will agree here, which is the sanctions against Russia. One which I know, because I had a robust exchange at the American Jewish Committee earlier in the week on the subject of Iran. So I know that there are more divided views, particularly in this city at this time on that issue. We on the European side would think it was a success, but I know there are differing views. But they do demonstrate that when we work together, we can move the dial, we can make things happen. And if we're not doing that, then life will be more difficult. So that's what we wanted to put on the table here today, and hopefully as part of a continuing dialogue into the autumn and with the new administration next year.
Okay. Thank you very much, Ambassador. Sam?
Well, thanks for having us here today as the representative of the Trump campaign, and I hope I will do an adequate job of that. Just a small correction: I'm the chief of the chief policy advisor to the campaign, so I'm a generalist. We've actually gone out here, and I started out as the principal advisor on policy back in August of last year. So I've been on board now almost a year, and we have certainly expanded our policy team to bring in specialists in these different areas. But I have a background in foreign policy and national security issues. And of course, that whether I like it or not, I have to claim the fact that I teach economics. So that isn't always a good thing, by the way. I don't talk about it with my family, so I'll just leave it at that, and I'll reserve time for later on for maybe more comments.
Yeah, please.
Right. Well, thank you very much for inviting me, and sorry for being so casual. I was told by Jan, so I'm the only on stage, but hope it doesn't matter. What I'm going to tell you, what I'm going to bring you, is not, however, a perspective of a mainstream political European thinking, because what I'm representing here is, let's say, the European opposition, or at least the Euro parliamentary opposition, as a backbone of this European Conservatives group, which I am a member of, and the Alliance of European Conservatives, which I'm chairman of, is the British Conservative Party, which is, of course, the party of Brexit. As political mainstream in Europe still sticks with the idea of ever closer union, of building more Europe, of probably, after Brexit, pursuing some more pan-European agendas even further. We are not buying that agenda. We are not buying that program. We think that Europe, particularly after Brexit, should try to find a new paradigm which would better reflect that new atmosphere, a new mood in European nations, of which Brexit was just one particular expression. So if Mr. Trump is elected president, he probably will get a bit different Europe or different EU than the United States have been used to until now. Of course, if Mr. Trump is elected, we in Europe probably also will get a bit different United States than we were used to until now, which doesn't mean that this is automatically something wrong. I think that we can find and we will find some new balance and new equilibrium. And I think that it would benefit to both sides. What kind of Europe potential President Trump could find in the future? In my feeling, it would be more flexible Europe. if you want something like multi-speech Europe, less centralized, probably less ambitious on the world stage, less powerful, because Brexit, without any doubt, means weakening of global ambitions of the European Union. And if you look at France and Netherlands and Scandinavia and other countries, there is a mood growing and rising in the EU that the whole complex, the whole institution should probably do less rather than to do more. When it comes to security consequences of that possible arrangement, there will be some. That's for sure. We still have one of them. Perhaps might be that all those dreams or plans or ideas to build something like a European army or some parallel armed structures or whatever of that kind are now off the table, because I don't think that without a UK participation, anything like that would be ever real. On security consequences, we have still NATO. NATO after Brexit, in my feeling, becomes of an utmost importance once again, and not only because it is just the only real defense military capable bloc, but also because it's the only real geopolitical tool or instrument, particularly for the United States, how to execute its global role towards Europe, and how also to maintain Atlantic link. Of course, if US still cares and will care about Europe, and I hope that it will. So if I may invite, or if I might invite next US president to do something with Europe, it would be probably a set of following recommendations: to be engaged with Europe more, not less, to be more focused on NATO as a basic tool of transatlantic security link. I'm not talking about trade links, because there will be a debate on that on the second panel. To be probably less believing and less relying on EU as some kind of state-like entity, perfectly united, because it will not be the case, in my feeling, in the future, and therefore to maintain also bilateral relations with individual EU member states as well, because their role within that new EU arrangement will, in my feeling, only grow. That's all for the beginning, and if there are any questions and comments, I would be happy to answer. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Les?
Thanks. It's a terrific honor to be up here with IRI and Ambassador Green. I appreciate your having me. I thought I'd just talk a little bit about my impressions of where Congress, particularly congressional Republicans, are on some of these issues, given my experience and background. I think, generally speaking, the members of Congress, and I think it's important to remember that Congress plays a very important role in the execution of foreign policy in this country. It's a co-equal branch of government, and while the president is charged with actually conducting foreign policy, it's the Congress that approves treaties and ambassadors and funds all of the activities of the U.S. government. And so the Congress, and in particular the Senate, plays an outsized role in what U.S. foreign policy will be. And I think when we talk about transatlantic security, you've seen the Senate and the House on the Republican side be for a very robust relationship. And that's been manifest in several things recently. Congress passed a bill immediately after Russia made moves on Ukraine to provide assistance to the Ukrainian government. It later provided on a bipartisan basis a bill for sanctions against Russia. And you saw a lot of members of Congress, key members, Senator Corker, Senator McCain, others, including Democrats, going to Ukraine, going to Kiev, and showing their solidarity with the people of Ukraine in the face of Russian aggression. Having said that, it's not a total. As Ambassador Green said, we are very much shoulder to shoulder with Europeans. However, there is concern on the Hill, as has been reflected in, I believe, some of the comments of the nominee of the party, that European countries need to do more to contribute to defense. There's concern about the level of defense spending among NATO allies, although I think in fairness we should point out that actually has been on the increase recently, but it still has a ways to go. So I think it's important to note that the Republican Party, at least in the congressional
the congressional component of the party has been for a very robust U.S.-European relationship. I think it would be remiss if we didn't note that just the comments of the last few hours, really, that there is some difference between where the nominee is and where congressional Republicans are. The nominee, Mr. Trump, made some comments about backing up NATO allies in the event of Russian aggression. That was immediately met with opposition from Senator McConnell, notably, and also Congressman Kinzinger, I think, was very expressed his views that differed from the nominees. So I think there's while you're here in Cleveland, there's a fascinating debate going on in the Republican Party between the nominee and congressional Republicans, and really also between the nominee and I think some of his advisors about what the role of the U.S. vis-a-vis the European Union and NATO will be. I think also in reference to Brexit, I think you'll see generally with the Republican Party a little more support for the concepts behind Brexit and a little more support for some of the themes and sovereignty issues. Not necessarily as true with the Democrat side. And I think that's another point of similarity between the nominee and congressional Republicans. So there's a lot of interesting nuanced issues between where the nominee is and where the rest of the party is that you're seeing play out right now.
Okay, thanks, Les. Good. We're going to turn the floor over to questions right now, but I think I might ask Sam if he'd be willing to perhaps respond to some of the points that have been made about NATO and those issues there.
I'd be delighted. I think it's a great place to start, and I'll try to keep my remarks brief so we can get to the questions. I think the questions are more important than anything else. I think the issue is a lot of times in the interviews, and it's just the style of my candidate and the nominee of the party. I have to get used to that now, Larry. Because it's so new to all of us. We've been fighting so long and so hard for this. A lot of times we're probably not as clear on what our intent is as one might be. The issue here is what we're talking about is accountability across the alliance. And what we're asking is that we want people we've done this in almost every aspect of our campaign, almost everything we've looked at. Make sure that we are accountable for ourselves, and we want our partners to be accountable, and we want everybody to do their part, and we want everybody to play by the rules. That's all we've been asking for all of this. And therefore, we talk about issues on burden sharing. We talk about the issues of everybody meeting their 2% requirement. We know there's movement in that direction, but it is going to take opportunity to do this. One of the things that often happens, and I'll just tell you, there's an analogy in the United States. Oftentimes you'll have a city like Chicago, where you'll have a very large, robust center city, and you'll have a large contingent. So the demand in services there goes for the large police departments and large fire departments. Well, a lot of the suburbs that surround that particular city will sit there and say, look, they have excess capacity. We have limited resources, so we will not produce as much, and perhaps we can depend on our neighbors to provide us that support. So certainly the city of Chicago, they will get paid something along the lines to go out here and do that. But the city of Chicago then will start to provide police support and fire support for some of the suburbs. This oftentimes takes place in other aspects, because if we continue to provide the burden share, the large share of this, which we are more than happy to do, but we also need our partners to do their part as well. This is an important element that we have to stress. One of the things I was asking him, I just came here from another diplomatic affair meeting, and had the opportunity, and somebody asked me about the notion it was on dealing with trade, and we won't get into that. That's the next panel. But one of the things I wanted to address is the issue. This is not zero sum. Just because America wants to put American interests first does not mean that means that that if we win, someone loses. What it means is if we win, we want to have partners that can win as well, so that we can all agree on what our commitments are and we can fulfill those commitments. And we all be held accountable because of the charter and what it says. That's really the position that I think that we're coming from, is we want everybody to do their part, and we'll be happy to take that leadership role. First and foremost, the number one priority for our administration likely will be the fact that we must get fundamental tax reform in the United States, because we have been staggering since 2000 with our GDP growing at less than 2%. Frankly, it's 1.78%. The last 11 years, it has been growing at 1.38%. That is no way for us to continue to come out of this recession, to have the rebound, to create the jobs necessary to clear 10 million people and backlogged and out of our labor force that we need to have working, and also to generate the revenue to have us meet our commitments to improve our infrastructure and revitalize our military. If we are not able to do that, then we are not going to be a dependable and reliable ally.
Thank you, Sam.
Should we point out that I think you used that metaphor, Sam, because Hillary was born in the Chicago suburbs?
Yep.
Is that?
I did not happen by accident. So.
Okay, thank you. I have 3 questions so far back here first. And if you could please come to one of the 2 microphones and just let us know who you are before you ask your question.
And please ask questions that I don't have to answer alone, okay? So.
Ashley Fox, I'm the leader of the British Conservatives in the European Parliament. Can I ask the panel to what extent they believe an EU common defence policy is militarily useful? Many Conservatives in Europe believe that this policy is actually an expression of EU political ambition, which detracts from NATO and actually harms military capability. Because the EU is busy building up duplicate structures which exclude our American allies and achieve almost nothing except wasting taxpayers' money. I'd appreciate your views.
You want to take that?
I think you may have answered the question in your question. I suspect, at least on the Hill, that there's, in the Republican side, there's a lot of agreement on that, and that NATO should be the focus of efforts, and that the U.S. should be included in what's going on in security issues.
Sure, absolutely, Ambassador.
With respect, sir, I think it's a slightly false dichotomy at this point. I think the debate EU versus NATO is an old debate. I don't think even people in NATO see it that way. It's about our collective defense capability and how to maximize it. And one of the problems we have in Europe is huge inefficiency in our defense spending, and not just the absolute amount. But if you actually add up all that we spend as the 28 member states, as we still are for the moment, we actually have the second largest defense budget in the world. We have 1.4 million people in uniform. But we know that our capacity to actually put people on the ground, it costs us 300,000 euros more to put a trained and equipped infantryman on the ground than it does the United States. So defense cooperation in Europe is not about creating a European army. It is not about undermining our capacity to work within NATO and with our NATO partners, including the United States. It's about getting more efficient results out of our defense spending, more cooperation, more pooling and sharing. Not everyone needs an aircraft carrier. Not everyone needs heavy lift capability. Not everyone needs air-to-air refueling, as we discovered when we were in Libya. So the United States, I think, is hugely anxious that we would work together to get more efficiency into our system and to cooperate more. So it's far from wasting taxpayers' money. I think European defence cooperation or EU defence cooperation actually can get us more bang for our buck, more value for our money, and make us a more effective partner in NATO. It's not about a single European army. It's not about competing with the NATO structures at all. We just had the recent NATO conference in Warsaw. We issued a joint declaration between the EU and NATO for the first time, and we want to cooperate much more because NATO, and I agree with Mr. Zaradil, NATO is absolutely crucial to our security posture. But as we know, with the changing nature of threats, you also need a whole-of-government approach to these issues. Development expenditure. The European Union and its member states is the largest contributor of defense, of development assistance in the world, the largest contributor of humanitarian assistance in the world, which is also contributing to trying to address some of the problems which are at our security risk. So I just think that's how we need to look at this. It's not a competition. It's not either or. We can do both. And we can make both work more efficiently. And I think many people in NATO are strongly desirous of more European cooperation on these issues to make us a more effective partner within the alliance.
Okay, thank you. Jan, did you want to contribute something?
Yeah, I think I've already responded to that, and Ashley knows that very well because we are part of the same political family. But let's be absolutely frank on that. There have always been some tendencies within some European political circles to build united Europe as a contradictory force and not a complementary force to the United States. I have been always, and I will be always supporting the idea to have Europe or European Union as a complementary force, as an ally of United States on the world stage. But I would harshly oppose any attempt to do it otherwise and to build European Union as a kind of separate global power that would try to challenge U.S. role on the world stage, because I would see it as a very unhealthy and weakening both sides of Atlantic. And partly there were also ideas within that other camp, that contradictory camp, that European armed forces or something like that, built supranationally and run supranationally, could serve to that idea of Europe. And this is, of course, something we were opposing, we are opposing, and we will be opposing when it comes to intergovernmental cooperation of individual member states under the umbrella of NATO with certain European dimension. I would have nothing against that. But again, without any political ambitions to build that as a part of some challenging of the idea of EU challenging United States on the world stage.
Thank you. Let's go here.
Thanks very much. Hi, I'm Josh Rogan with the Washington Post.
Hey, Josh, how are
Sam,
you?
good to see you. My question is for you, actually. So
I know it would be, so that's all right. Thanks, Josh.
Sure, no problem. So, we understand what you're saying about burden sharing, right? It's something that everyone can agree with. Okay, there should be good burden sharing, right? But what Donald Trump said in his New York Times interview went well beyond that, right? He said the U.S. might not necessarily come to the aid of Baltic states if they haven't paid their bills. He said we have to be prepared to walk away from NATO if they don't do what we want them to do. He said we might dismantle U.S. bases all over the world and bring back thousands of troops to save money. Doesn't actually save money, but anyway, that's what he said, right? So these are things that go well beyond just, okay, we're all for burden sharing. So as I talk to European diplomats and Republicans around Cleveland, they all say the same thing. They say, okay, well, there's two theories about what we should make out of Donald Trump's comments. One is that he's a businessman, and these are negotiating positions, and he's setting a negotiating position in order to make a deal, okay? That's one way to look at it. The other way to look at it is he really means all this stuff. And if that's true, and these are really the things that he plans to do if elected, then every country in the world should start making adjustments now and redoing their plans now and making contingency plans now, because they can't wait to see if he's elected before we start compensating for the fact that the U.S. is no longer going to honor its treaty obligations. So which is it? Is he negotiating, or does he really mean it?
I think it's you have to take a look at, if you've ever read one of his many books, Josh, you'll answer your own question. I think that what we're really saying is we're putting a marker out there to say that this is our expectation. We expect people to do what they sign up to do. We are going to do our part. We want to lead. We know that we're the world leaders. We are going to honor our commitments to our allies all over the world. There are some adjustments that are likely going to have to be made because this is a new time, and a lot of times we've set these things. And I want to just pick up on some of the things that you said, John, that some of these things have lain dormant for my entire adult life. I've been involved in NATO as a activist, a pure actor in NATO for 40 years of my life. I know every bunker, I know every target, I knew it all. And I will tell you that the issue is when you internalize that and you work with our allies, and I was back before NATO expanded, and you work with all these issues, you see the incredible inefficiencies that come because we don't have a common command and control system. You see the inefficiencies that come when we cannot find common equipment out on the battlefield. We see the inefficiencies that come if we cannot train to the levels that are possible for us. And I think every country has an obligation to fulfill their need and not some collective European approach. Because the country has its own sovereignty. I'm a federalist myself. I believe in that each individual country has its own sovereignty. And I think Mr. Trump is committed to support and our commitment to NATO. But by God, we're going to have to start taking a look at things. It's time to review the bidding on where we are with that alliance, because the sea has changed in Europe, the EU has changed, and countries have changed. Think about what has happened to just the demographics that have taken place, the changes there in many of the countries in Europe, and what the costs are associated with taking in 1.4 million refugees into the country, the impact that has on social programs and institutions. It's a guns and butter issue, Josh. They have to, are they even going to be able to afford the military that they already have, let alone try to do more? And I think that each country has a commitment. Mr. Trump looks at each country having a commitment. And I think all we're asking is that we're setting a marker out here that says, you've got to do your part. Because if we don't have thriving economies, if we don't have a thriving economy in the United States, I'll guarantee you there won't be thriving economies anywhere else in the world.
If I could just, a very quick follow-up question.
Sure.
One of the main criticisms your campaign has had of the Obama-Clinton foreign policy is that it doesn't stand by our allies enough. Does making all these statements, even if, as you say, Donald Trump really believes them, doesn't that undermine that entire argument?
Not at all. I think it's quite the opposite. I think what it says is we're going to be right there with you. We'll stand with you, but you've got to, if you're going to come to the gunfight, carry a gun. Make sure that we're not the only ones with a gun. That's all we're saying. If you're going to come to the gunfight, make sure you're packing.
Got it. Thank you.
Hi, Lachlan Marquet with the Washington Free Beacon. Just to follow up on that, I was just hoping to get kind of the European perspective on this idea of sort of rethinking the NATO alliance, especially with this sort of revanchist Russia that we've seen. How does that affect either current member states or potential future member states, how they view the alliance as a security tool? How does it affect transatlantic cooperation when we're sort of putting all options on the table right now and saying, we need to go back and rethink some of the fundamentals of this agreement, everything up to Article 5? How is that going to affect our ability to cooperate with European partners going forward? I'll take one.
I'm not sure whether I got the question, because it was a response in itself. We've joined NATO with other countries in 1999. There was until then the greatest political achievement for those new democracies in Central and Eastern Europe. And there is still a lot of support. If you look at pollsters, there is still a lot of support NATO enjoys amongst population in those Central and Eastern European countries. And of course, with that new assertivity of Russian foreign policy, we are concerned even more. I do not believe into some direct, military threat or anything like that, but I do believe that we are facing a political and geopolitical challenge and threat from the Russian side, and that NATO should use also its political arm to show that it's able to respond if necessary. So, I think that now, after this Warsaw summit, which has shown us once again that there might be clear responses found, we are once again in the position where we should strengthen NATO, we should focus on NATO, we should, get rid of some unrealistic dreams about how armed forces should be or could be rebuilt in Europe, or whether there is some different formula that could be found. And we should stick with NATO because it's been working and it is working, and I hope that it'll be working in the future as well. And I fully agree with that necessity to stick with commitments. And, this is, of course, a question for each and every government of NATO member state and each and every parliamentary majority in every NATO member state, whether it is responsible enough to reshuffle or remodel the national budget according those needs and according those commitments. And I hope that there will be enough responsibility amongst European nations to do so and to stick with those commitments and to show to our allies on the other side of Atlantic that we can be reliable allies when it comes to military expenditure.
Ambassador?
Just very briefly, I mean, firstly, I should emphasize I don't speak for NATO, obviously. I'm Irish, we're neutral. We just, as one Irish Prime Minister famously said, we're neutral, we're just not sure who we're neutral against. But, I just want to emphasize that for the 22 members of the European Union who are also members of NATO, NATO is absolutely imperative to our security, to global security, and is absolutely at the core of the security posture of our member states, and there I agree entirely with Mrs. Aradil. I also think that there can be complementarity between European efforts. It can be individual countries, but there is also value added in what we do jointly at European level, whether these are the missions that we had, the Atalanta naval mission off the coast of Somalia fighting against piracy, what we're doing now in the southern Mediterranean, what we've done in Mali, what we've done in Aceh. These are important European contributions where there can be complementarity. And to Sam's point, I think we're all aware of the need to rethink our current military posture, our equipment, our way of dealing with these issues. But I think there are advantages also in European cooperation to make us a more effective partner inside the alliance, which is not, as I say, in any way competing with the fundamental nature of the alliance and the role of the United States in that.
Thank you. Ryan, and then one more question, and we're going to wrap up this session.
Ryan Heath from Politico Europe. It's like the US one, but we're operating in Europe now as well. I think probably we can all agree on the defence spending point that aiming for 2%, saying you want it, that's the easy thing. But the reality is only 5 of the alliance's members hit that target. So instead of just saying we want it, what about fleshing out a little bit more from both sides how to get there? So I'd love to know a little bit, what are the step-by-step elements that you think would actually get you to your objective, and what sort of timeline is realistic? You know, when are we going to action the sort of threat that is in the bargaining chip that Mr. Trump's laid on the table this morning?
You want me to briefly, I just think, it's a great question. I think I think none of this is going to happen overnight because all of us have to do a tremendous job of shifting resources. The other thing is, if we don't have a robust economy that's growing at 3.5% or 4% in the United States, we're not going to have the wherewithal to go ahead and do and recapitalize our military so that we can fulfill our obligations and do the things we need to do. We have so many great needs in this country. I mean, we have infrastructure needs. We have all these other things. So we have to take a hard look at what we're doing. I think this gives us an opportunity. This is not I just want to make sure we posture this in the proper tone. This is not a hostile, confrontational issue. This is an opportunity for us to go in and take a hard look at where we stand in NATO. And is it time for us to do some shifting, get some different strategies, look at different commonalities, look at how we can create, where some countries have some strength, how we can cooperate in research and development. It's probably a time for us to look at the reinvestment in NATO. And that, I think, is a really important notion of this. It's a much more optimistic picture than I think is being painted here, because that's what we're really asking. We're really looking at, let's make it better. And again, this is not a win-lose situation. This is win-win, but it's not going to help if we don't have a strong economy in the United States.
Anyone else want to respond?
I cannot give you any timetable or any sequencing of those steps, but the truth is that most European states underspend on defense, and everybody knows that. And this is also partly because certain psychology or certain atmosphere that appeared in Europe after 1989, after the fall of the Iron Curtain, and after everybody was happy that the liberal democracy is winning, and probably many people thought that we were approaching the end of history and all that stuff. Now people gradually, probably slowly but gradually, are getting to recognize that this is not the case, that this is not the truth, that the world is still dangerous, although those dangers come from a different angle or from different sources. And I think that for changing national budgets, for spending more for defense, for adjusting to those commitments we've once done, the first and foremost condition is to change the psychology of political thinking, because as far as politicians do not believe they are facing a real threat, they will never spend enough money for defense. And this is the question of psychological or political mindset. And I hope that it's going to change, and I hope that it's going to change very fast.
I would like, if I would, I'd like to find out what Larry has to say about Congress. Because
Lester, by the way.
Lester, I'm sorry.
That's all right.
Excuse me.
So I do think it's notable that Mr. Trump, if indeed he did in fact imply that U.S. coming to the aid of an ally in NATO was contingent on the 2%, if that in fact was what happened, it did kind of drive the debate right into this area to the point where I think it was the president of Estonia this morning tweeted out the fact that Estonia is paying better than 2%, just to make sure everyone knows that. So at least you can at least say that this, and perhaps the interest of McConnell and Kinzinger and others has at least created a debate, and we've drawn some attention to the issue. So there's a salutary effect of what's going on.
Thanks. Final question.
Wayne Mary, the American Foreign Policy Council. For the past couple of years, Republicans have been quite critical of the Obama administration for its policy of not providing Ukraine with lethal weaponry. And certainly Republicans have told Ukrainians in Ukraine and in Washington that after the election that would change, even if Hillary Clinton won, but certainly if there were a Republican in the White House. As of Tuesday morning, that appears to not be the case. And in this stage on Tuesday afternoon, Governor Kasich spoke really quite forcefully in criticism of that change. Now, I know this is a small news item in the American news blitz out of Cleveland this week, but in parts of Central and Eastern Europe, that was the big news story out of Cleveland earlier this week. And I'd like to know if we can be clear as to what the message was.
I think that, and clearly every question's to me, so and I get that. I think that the issue here is the notion, again, about what we are able to do. What is the cost to the United States for us to do that, and have we thought through the consequences of that decision? This is something I don't think anyone in the United States has, including my fellow Republicans. We have had a very strong and strident debate inside our party over this very issue. It's okay to go out here and load your mouth up and say stuff, and go out here and say, yeah, we're going to come to your aid. We're going to provide you arms. We're going to come out and do all these things. But nobody has taken the time to think this through to its logical conclusion. What is the likelihood of other actions that will have to take place? What are the ancillary activities that are associated with that? What are the costs going to be to the United States, not just in Ukraine, but also in NATO and also around the world? Are we going to be able to fulfill our commitments, and what is going to be the capital drain on our treasury? We're not about to spill one drop of blood or spend another dollar unless we know exactly what the outcome is going to be, or at least have some notion of what the predictability is. I hate to be so forceful, but we had forceful commentary, and I think forceful reaction and forceful answer is appropriate.
Thank you. Mark, anyone else?
I think it's a fair point. It's also, I think, the same point that the Obama White House makes. And so it's a notable parallel. I think there's actually bipartisan opposition in the Senate. Senator Menendez of the other party was actually leading the charge for lethal weapons for the Ukrainians. And I believe the logic is that until you meet strength with strength, the Russians will continue to run amok opportunistically in the region. So I do think there's been some thought. I think there's been some deep thinking about it. And I think, and I don't necessarily know what the ultimate answer is. I don't think anyone can. But I do think you can make characterizations about the nature of the threat and the appropriate way to respond. And I think there's a huge disagreement within the party and, frankly, within the other party about how to approach this.
I want to add one more thing, just real quickly here, just to finish up. And I don't want this to be a negative thing, because I think what we're offering is we're offering a very clear, mature, adult, realistic view of the world. It may not follow the Republican orthodoxy, but it does follow an orthodoxy that is based in reality. And we may not know the ground truth, and until we know the ground truth, we really need to be careful about making sure the commitments, and the biggest thing is to go out here and make these incredible declarations about what we're going to do in certain circumstances when we have no clear idea of how we're going to follow through and how we're going to complete the game. And I think you need to do that before you start loading up your mouth and writing checks your butt can't cash, if you know what I mean. So,
Right. I'd like to take this opportunity to thank all of the panelists for a great discussion. Thank you.
oh, thank you.
We're going to exit to the right. Please stay where we are, and we're going to see a video and then move to our second panel.
1982, the Cold War rages. Many politicians describe the world in terms of banks and bullets.
I'm sorry, if you want to ask
President
questions, we need to do it over here because we need to get the next panel.
Competition between freedom and oppression.
Over here.
The first American president to speak before the British Parliament, he issues a bold call to the community of democracies.
We must be staunch in our conviction that freedom is not the sole prerogative of a lucky few, but the inalienable and universal right of all human beings. We in America now intend to take additional steps, as many of our allies have already done, toward realizing this same goal. The chairman and other leaders of the National Republican and Democratic Party organizations are initiating a study with the Bipartisan American Political Foundation to determine how the United States can best contribute as a nation to the global campaign for democracy now gathering force. We must take actions to assist the campaign for democracy.
President Reagan's words inspired the founding of the International Republican Institute in 1983. For over 30 years, IRI has worked to foster liberty throughout the world, helping young emerging democracies take root, sharing knowledge so existing democracies grow stronger.
We impose nothing. Instead, we try to help those who are seeking a voice in their own future, give them the tools to have that voice.
Yet optimism is in order, because day by day, democracy is proving itself to be a not at all fragile flower.
While totalitarian regimes have crumbled, IRI has been a powerful and enduring force for freedom, helping to build Ronald Reagan's infrastructure of democracy in Asia, South America, Eastern Europe, Africa, and the Middle East. So freedom is not the sole prerogative of the lucky few.
But what that really means is helping people have a say in their governance, helping people determine how to make a better life for themselves.
To help spread the blessings of democracy, IRI is working to empower the disenfranchised, women, youth, and other marginalized communities. IRI is giving life to President Reagan's vision of a world where freedom is a universal right, helping strengthen democracy worldwide to meet the dangerous and deadly new challenges of repression and totalitarianism.
We have not inherited an easy world. There are threats now to our freedom, indeed to our very existence, that other generations could never even have imagined.
People don't flee democracies, they flee to democracies, and that's part of what we're seeing in the world today.
IRI is proving democracy is not a fragile flower, but a strong antidote to slavery and depression, and the hope of freedom-loving people everywhere.
For the task I've set forth will long outlive our own generation. Let us now begin a major effort to secure the best, a crusade for freedom that will engage the faith and fortitude of the next generation. For the sake of peace and justice, let us move toward a world in which all people are at last free to determine their own destiny.
Thank you, everybody. And if the remaining folks who are standing could take their seats, and we can continue. I'm not quite entirely sure how we live up to that panel, but we're going to give it a shot. To do that, in this discussion now about questions of trade and economics on a transatlantic level, we have some equally excellent guests to hash this topic out with us. Ambassador O'Sullivan remains. Casey Higgins is Assistant to the Speaker for Policy and Trade Counsel in the Office of the Speaker, has been with Speaker Ryan, former Congressman Ryan, former Just Congressman Ryan, for 5 years now. And before that, served in a number of capacities at the Federal Election Commission, the Republican National Lawyers Association. She also has another specific tie to the IRI family, and that was in the fact that she was operations manager for Ambassador Mark Green's gubernatorial campaign in 2006. So Casey, we're glad you're here with us today. Thank you. And Andrew Luer, member of the European Parliament for the British Conservative Party, was elected to the European Parliament in 2014, represents Derbyshire, and comes from a series of positions in local government, county council in Derbyshire. In the Parliament, he sits with the group of European Conservatives and Reformists, and serves on the committees of the Committee for Regional Development and the Committee for Culture and Education. He's also the vice chairman of New Direction, which is the political party foundation associated with the Alliance of European Conservatives and Reformists. So we're glad that you're both here. And Casey, if I might ask you to start and introduce the topic.
Happy to do it. So I handle just trade. I don't handle the broader foreign affairs package. I get to stick just to the really fun stuff. This has been a very interesting year, I think, to say the least, on the trade front, both here and in the EU generally. I think we have a lot that we need to overcome, but I think we are very encouraged that our strong relationship is continuing. As we continue the discussions on TTIP and TISA and other things, am I not on?
You're not on.
I'm not on. No, I'm on. Sorry. As we continue the discussions on TTIP, TISA, other agreements, I think the politics in both in the U.S. and in the EU have affected some of those things. Nevertheless, we think that our committees are working hard on this. USCR is working hard, and we're very optimistic that we can find a pathway forward. TPP is another thing that I get asked about a lot. This is something that obviously has been negotiated and we're working through. As it currently stands, we do not feel like this is something that we can pass in Congress. So we are working with the administration to try to get to a point that we can resolve some of those issues with biologics. There have been some progress made on some of the other issues that our members have concerns with. So we are hopeful that we can resolve those issues and move forward with that. That being said, I think TTIP, we're glad that continues to move forward and that it's getting a lot of focus from USTR at this stage. And then, of course, you have Brexit. We had both our Ways and Means Committee chairman last week, along with the chairman of the Senate Finance Committee, who have trade jurisdiction, introduce a resolution discussing the U.S. and UK relationship and how important that is, and that we would like to move forward with strengthening those ties, both from a trade perspective and an economic perspective. But simultaneously, TTIP, is something that we still believe is very important, and they need to go together as well. We also have been aware of the legal ramifications of how you negotiate these trade deals, given Brexit and the time that it takes to fully execute that referendum. And while we're cognizant of that, I think we want to continue conversations with the UK while continuing to move forward with the TTIP conversations. So I'm sure you have lots of questions. I'll keep my comments short, but thank you for having me.
Great. Thanks. Andrew?
Thank you. It's actually the whole of the East Midlands rather than just Derbyshire.
Oh, I'm sorry.
That's a common,
it's a much larger
common
space.
mistake. It's my fault. So when Jan and Richard Milson asked me to speak here in Cleveland, I asked whether it was going to be a specialised and narrow topic or whether it was going to be something slightly broader. So as the title is The Future of the Global Economy, I think you've answered You've answered that question, so I apologise if I don't cover the entire subject in the 4 minutes that I have in front of you. So several broad points. I'm a British Conservative MEP, and I was in favour of the United Kingdom leaving the European Union. And I took that decision. I thought that was the best thing on balance. Am I happy about it? No. Do I believe it was the right result? Yes, I do. Jean-Claude Juncker and I don't agree about very much, but when he called it a divorce, I think that was right. I mean, he then obviously went on to talk a lot of stuff that I didn't agree with much more normally. But divorce, can sometimes, in this secular context of where I'm at the Republican Party convention here, divorce can sometimes, in the secular context, be right. It can be for the best. It can lead to a better future. But it isn't something ever to celebrate or gloat over. And that's my reaction. And my reaction is that it's now time for us to move on. Brexit is Brexit, as our new Prime Minister, Theresa May, said just the other day. So one of the biggest questions here are some issues around, for the UK, access to the EU single market, access, participation, a role in the regulation of that is a very complex issue, very complicated indeed, and there are a lot of nuances in there that the time we have available doesn't allow us to explore. But one thing I do think is worth mentioning is that 21 out of the 30 top trading partners with the European Union not so much have access to the single market. They don't actually even have a free trade agreement with the European Union, but 21 of the top 30 countries that trade with the EU. So the issue, in contrast to freedom of movement for the UK in its trade relationships, concerns freedom of movement, which actually is the freedom not to have control over your own borders. It's not anti-immigration, let alone xenophobic or racist, to want that, but it's a big issue for us. And from the UK perspective, going through all the pain and the debate and the division of Brexit and coming to that decision means that the EU not being prepared to relent in any way on freedom of movement means that there will be, in the American expression, no sale. It's not going to be possible, in my view, for there to be an agreement between the UK and the EU where the UK has to agree to freedom of movement, because that was one of the big issues in this referendum. So what does that mean for the UK and US trade? Well, in the past context, President Obama's reference to the back of the queue for the UK in this issue was welcomed strangely by both sides of the debate in the Brexit debate. The Project Fear side wanted that sort of alarmist rhetoric to try and frighten people into voting to stay in the EU. And the other side used that as an opportunity to create resentment of being ordered around. I mean, I'm in the Republican Party convention here. I know that there are people here who don't like other countries ordering them around and telling them what to do. And that was a very similar reaction from many people in the UK. The use of the word queue, I think, gave a bit of a clue to that, because it's line here, isn't it? And it's queue in the United Kingdom. So that tainted Obama's legacy, I'm afraid, and created, as one of our former speakers said, I'm not an economist either, but I do remember the law of diminishing returns. So when Obama said it, it had reaction, and when all these other world leaders said it, then it had less and less of a reaction as it went along, because we'd already heard it as the World Leaders Club lined up to make the predictable statements. So, finally, currently, the queue's disappeared all of a sudden. We just heard that the queue's disappeared all of a sudden. And both Democrats and Republicans are now keen to remind and talk about the special relationship between the UK and the US. In the future, in my view, the transatlantic trade agreement between the United States and the European Union won't happen. I think the EU's turning against deregulation, it's turning against free trade, and even in former times, it takes the EU forever to do trade deals. A quick win for the UK and the USA with a free trade agreement is very possible. Two countries have very much in common. They have a common law principle and a great history and a shared language and a lot of cultural similarities. I think a faster and much easier deal is possible, and whilst that would only be 63 million people versus 420, the difference is it will actually happen. So it may not be as big a trade deal, but it's actually a real trade deal rather than one that will just take 10 years and then not actually materialise. It's critical for the UK because we've got a big mission now, a big statement that the UK is open for business, that we're ready to do these sort of deals. It's critical for the United States. Donald Trump's a businessman candidate. He's presented himself as a man who can get the deals done. Here's a great opportunity for him to very quickly demonstrate that and get this deal done in a hurry. It's good for Hillary as well because it enables her to get a deal done which would actually place pressure on the EU to get on with it and get talking about that one at the same time. So to conclude, staying in wasn't a static choice for the United Kingdom. It was about where the EU was going, and in my view and that of many other people, it wasn't going and isn't going in a very good place. And from the United States point of view, to my friends here in the United States, I'd invite you to imagine a North and South American union where most of the countries in that union have the peso, and you've still got the dollar, but at some point you'll end up having the peso because everyone else has. Your labour laws and a huge percentage of your other laws are made in Guatemala, and when they're made in Guatemala, you haven't got any choice over changing them in the United States. Anyone in the South American and North American Union is free to travel anywhere they want to work and settle from any country in South America, my wife's South American, by the way, to the United States. Instead of being US citizens, you're Latino North American citizens with a different sense of citizenship, and it's not about being American, about being a US citizen anymore. It's about this great, wonderful new idea of being a Latin North American citizen instead. How many people in the United States would accept that? How many American politicians would put that forward and say that was a great idea for the future of the USA? None. And many people in the UK took the view that what is good for the United States as a view of your own sovereignty and freedom is good for ours as well. And that's why many of us took the view that we did. Thank you very much.
Sebastian.
3 points, if I may. Firstly, trade in general. Like Sam Clovis in the last panel, I'm also a lapsed or a spoiled economist. But the only thing I truly believe in is the law of comparative advantage. Even if a country can produce everything better than its neighbors, it makes sense to produce what you produce most efficiently and import the rest. Trade makes us all wealthier. Trade is there are no autarkic success stories in human history. And I think we have to continuously defend the benefits of trade liberalization and trade openness. The European Union is the largest trading bloc in the world. We are the largest destination for 80 countries. The comparable figure for the United States is 20 countries. We have more free trade deals. We are the only major trading bloc that offers duty-free, quota-free access to less developed countries. We live by trade, and we will continue to pursue that. We have an ambitious trade agenda. We've just concluded with Canada a major ambitious trade agreement. We're negotiating actively with Mexico to upgrade our free trade agreement from a previous generation, with Chile, with Mercosur. We're negotiating with Japan, with India, and with the countries of ASEAN. And with respect, Mr. Luer, we do not take years to produce a trade deal. When I negotiated the Korea trade deal, we did it in 2.5 years. Our exports have gone up by 80% to South Korea, and we actually have a surplus in automobile trade. It's one of the success stories of our trade policy, but as most of our trade deals are. So one of the things I think that we need to do in this situation is to continuously remind people of the benefits of trade liberalization. I'm not a dogmatic free trader. Trade is a disruptor. It does cause disruption, and you have to compensate for that. You have to then look at the people who may lose out, the sectors that may lose out, or the regions that may lose out. You need a regional policy to compensate and help people rebuild if their region is adversely affected. You need training and education and reskilling policies to help your workforce constantly adapt. But we know one thing for certain: closing our frontiers to trade is a downward spiral of economic regression. It is not a secret for revitalizing our economies. And I think this is something which we in Europe believe profoundly and which we must continue to defend. Dealing with transatlantic trade relations, I think there are huge advantages to a trade agreement between the United States and the EU. By the way, we wish TPP well. We think it's a good trade agreement. We hope it is successful. We would love to see it ratified and implemented, because trade deals anywhere benefit everyone, and we would also benefit from TPP, even if we are also negotiating in parallel with many of the same partners. By the way, we've also announced that we will shortly start negotiations with Australia and New Zealand, something which I personally took took a very close interest in when I was back in Brussels. But a trade deal between the EU and the US has many advantages. We have many common standards. We have much complementarity between our economies. It's not an impossible task to complete it this year, but it's difficult given the politics on both sides of the Atlantic. We hope we can still do it, but if we don't, we've only been negotiating for three years. If we can complete it end of next year, beginning of the following year, in 4.5, 5 years, that's a good time frame for a typical trade deal. It took the US 6 years to negotiate TPP. It took us nearly 5.5 years to negotiate with Canada. This is typically the time frame of any trade negotiation. So I think we need to continue to work on that. On the issue of Brexit, look, I won't rise to the bait of the description of the European Union towards the tail end of Andrew's intervention. I don't recognise the Europe that I know and have fought for all my life, which has brought peace, prosperity, reconciliation, and unparalleled opportunity to many countries, whether from my own country, the UK, which has prospered hugely through its membership of the European Union. But look, no need to relitigate the referendum. We regret the decision. We respect it. The UK is leaving. We now have to work to make that be the least damaging outcome for the UK and for the rest of us. And we will try to do that. It's not going to be simple. It's going to be complicated, but I'm sure, and we understand that the UK needs a little time to sort of recalibrate and figure out exactly what way they want to go forward. And I think it was clear in the context that the new Prime Minister has had this week with European counterparts in Berlin, in Dublin and in Paris, that people are going to be reasonably sympathetic of that. On the other hand, uncertainty is the enemy of us all. We need at some point a plan as to how this is going to pan out. I think on trade, look, I think we should keep an open mind on what will be in the UK's best interest, what's in the best interests of us all. Starting new trade negotiations from scratch with many of the partners with whom we either have trade deals or with whom we're now negotiating, it's an option for the UK. You may prefer to try it. Good luck. It's not going to happen quickly, I can assure you. Trade deals just don't happen quickly. You will find this out when you start getting into the details. And nobody does you any favours in trade deals. They're always give and take. But by the way, one option, and Cecilia Malmström, the Trade Commissioner, mentioned this when she was in Washington recently, I have not excluded, and she had not excluded, that the UK could still benefit from TTIP if we concluded. The UK, in any event, the departure of the UK from the EU is going to take several years, we know that. And it could be that in the meantime we've concluded TTIP. We've always seen TTIP potentially as an open platform. We've always debated, for example, Turkey was actually the country that we most often talked about because we have a customs union. I don't see why we should exclude that the UK could still benefit from TTIP while not being a full member of the European Union. I think that's an option. And it may be that we can have a similar approach to other trade deals which we're negotiating. I'm not saying this is not a recommendation. The UK may prefer to go out on its own and negotiate its own trade deals, but I think we should keep all options open as to how we can get the best outcome of this new situation of the UK departing the European Union in the interests of the UK, who will still remain an ally, a friend, a partner, but in different circumstances, and the rest of us who also have legitimate interests, the 27, at stake in this debate, which is going to be complicated, it's going to be disruptive, but it's a new situation, we have to deal with it, and we will try to make the best of it in everyone's best interest.
Thank you, Ambassador. While you think of your questions and come forward to the microphones that are on the floor, I would perhaps just like to pose the first question. I think it seems to me to be extremely worrying that in some parts of Europe, particularly in Germany, although not only there, it seems that the anti-trade, the anti-TTIP forces have gained the upper hand in the public opinion battle. We see large demonstrations in a number of cities organized by a number of anti-globalist, anti-free trade movements. And I think, unfortunately, it appears also to be spreading. And I'm just wondering if we believe that it's possible to reverse that in the public mind, and if so, what are the most effective actions we can take to begin to reverse that process?
Well, I think you're right. I mean, I've been negotiating trade deals for a number of years, and frankly, most of the time there wasn't a huge interest in them, certainly among popular public opinion. There was an interest in the European Parliament, there was an interest, of course, in the member states, there was interest in specialized milieu, if you like, industrial organizations, trade unions, I mean, people who sort of followed these things. Ordinary public opinion didn't take much of an interest. That has changed, I agree. And we have to draw some consequences from that. I think the strongest argument, to be honest with you, is actually to debate real outcomes. The problem we have with TTIP is that the allegations which are made against it are hypothetical. We're told it will force-feeding GMOs to our babies. Hormone beef will be, obligatory in all our schools. No, this is not what it's going to be. But it's hard to oppose that when you say this is not how it's going to happen. Now, Cecilia Malmström has taken the unprecedented initiative of being extremely transparent, rather more transparent, frankly, than us traditional trade negotiators like being. But I think it was the right step. We put all our proposals on the website. It's all there. You can read it. And I think that goes some way towards dispelling popular opinion. But of course, people still suspect that somehow there's a document in the drawer that we're not showing them. But take the agreement with Canada, which is now there. It is out there. It is visible. You can touch it. You can read it. You can see what it says, what it does not say. There's going to be a debate because many of the people opposed to TTIP are now saying, well, we shouldn't agree also with the trade deal with Canada, which, by the way, is a remarkable deal, both in Canada's interest and in our interest. And I think let's have the debate. Let's unpack that debate and let's see, does it threaten the NHS in the UK, even if the UK will eventually leave afterwards? Does it threaten our public services? Does it threaten our food standards or our health standards or our safety standards? And I think the answer will be consistently no. And then, in my view, we can show that these are well-negotiated trade deals, responsibly negotiated by people on a mandate from our member states and from the European Parliament, and accountable to the member states and to the European Parliament, and ultimately to national parliaments for approval. And then let's see. And I think the best way to push back is to be specific and be able to defend why these deals actually offer good outcomes, both for the EU and for, in this case, our partner Canada, and why these are deals which should be approved and welcomed as a positive contribution to economic growth.
Casey, would you like to say something?
If I may answer from a U.S. perspective, I share those thoughts absolutely. I think people often forget, too, the last time we went through this process prior to TPP was in 2011. So it's been a while. And we gained some ground through TPA, helping to sell why trade is a good thing. And we were able to kind of bump those numbers up. But we did encounter the same thing where when you're selling TPA, you're selling a process and there's still no trade agreement to look at. So it makes it very difficult for members to, talk to their constituents about how this isn't going to happen as a result of this. And they're worried about the process. So we gained some ground during the TPA debate. I think we've lost some ground in recent months due to some of the rhetoric on the presidential stage. But it's encouraging because our members, at the end of the day, in both the House and the Senate, both still understand the importance of free trade. They absolutely do. They understand it from a security perspective, from an economic perspective. They understand, especially with TTIP, that this relationship is so important, and with the UK as well. And I think, particularly with TTIP, there's a lot more bipartisan interest in it. But part of it is just being able to get out there and talk to members have the members talk to their constituents about what is actually in this agreement. We're kind of getting to that point with TPP now. As I said, there are some issues we're still trying to work through. But we have some great companies in the U.S. too that have been working so hard to educate their employees and to educate the public on the benefits of these agreements.
Yeah, thanks. Andrew?
Yeah, I agree with everything you said about trade. I mean, this is the image, the themes within the European Union that we've always felt as a country was one of the main reasons for being in it. But of course, obviously, that illustrates the fact for the United Kingdom, EU membership was always essentially a transactional relationship rather than an emotional, political relationship. My problem is, unfortunately, that TTIP only has the support of 17% of the German public at the moment. 17% of the largest country, and the country that is traditionally regarded as one of the most outward-looking, big trading nations in the European Union. The objection to transatlantic trade and those concepts that exist in the United Kingdom is generally speaking vested in the Labour Party, which has just fallen apart and is not going to be a force to be reckoned with for quite some considerable time, I'm extremely pleased to say. That argument doesn't have to be made in the British Conservative Party. It's one of the reasons the British Conservative Party has existed and been in place for so long, because it's one of our key fundamental principles. So we've always supported TTIP. It's one of the great things about the EU, if the EU had been prepared to change and reform in other areas that we wanted. So as a result, If this is able to be delivered, then great. But I'm afraid I retain my cynicism with the way the tectonic plates of politics are in such huge flux at the moment, populism rising, this massive unpopularity in Germany of all places, let alone France and the other places who've always hated free trade anyway. I just don't think it's going to happen.
Okay. Thanks, Andrew. We'll take the 3 questions from the individuals that are here now and start over here.
One of the things that we've heard during the campaign is that energy is inherently tied into economic prosperity, with an emphasis in the platform on coal and petroleum. And I'm curious to what extent people on the platform today see any potential complications in foreign policy dealings when it comes to trying to negotiate or to arrive at agreements in the wake of the the Paris climate talks.
Yeah, huge enthusiasm to go for that one, I can see. It's only because it's a good and very, very complex question. I am just interested to hear at the convention this week the perspective that even people on the right, on the whole, in the UK and other places in the EU, tend not to take about energy. The position on fossil fuels, the position on coal, etc., is just so vastly different than the position taken, not just from the traditional left on this subject, but even from the right and right of centre, that actually do agree with you that it will be a major complicating factor.
Well, I think climate change is real. I think it poses the single biggest security threat, identified by the US military, by the way, in their analysis, that it's actually the single greatest threat facing us collectively in this century. Because of its impact on many countries, even if you look at the Arctic and what's going to happen there with the Northwest Passage, but if you look at desertification, if you look at islands sinking in the Pacific, if you think of we're going to have a massive issue of climate migration. So this is a huge issue. I think Paris is a huge breakthrough because for the first time we got an international consensus around this issue and commitments from all the major actors to do something. It's not enough on its own. It's a platform. It's a start. I think this is a huge achievement. We need to keep going. I think ultimately this is going to be driven also by industry, by technology, by innovation. I think the carbon economy is on its way out. And if you want to be economically competitive, you're going to have to get ahead of that curve and go with the green economy and go with the progressive technologies which will give you the competitive advantage. I think in the end, that's what's going to drive this almost more than anything else. But it's not going to be easy. There's going to be political tensions in making this adaptation. We know that. I'm very conscious of the debate here in the United States, and I'm well aware that this is going to be something that's going to be debated for many years to come. But I think really we should not lose sight of the fact that this is not simply an economic issue. It's not even an environmental issue for the sake of the planet. It's also something with huge foreign policy and security implications going forward.
Okay, we'll go over here.
Yeah, I'm Jid Bashir, member of the European Parliament, also a keen advocate for Brexit. I'd just like to ask a question in particular of Mr. O'Sullivan, Ambassador O'Sullivan, because you said that it would be very difficult for the EU to conclude a trade deal with the UK. It will take many years. I was just wondering why that would be, because I've had the fortune to travel to Taiwan. Taiwan has politically a diametrically opposing view as to how to run the country as opposed to China, and yet 80 flights a week take place between the two. And the greatest number of investment that China has comes from Taiwan. In fact, whole cities have built up on the coast of China, sponsored by and been financially set up by Taiwan. So I think you're absolutely right. Trade is of great benefit to the entire planet and to the countries. When UK, which has been a member of the EU for 40-odd years, and all its goods and services meet all the specification required by the EU, And it's in a great place to conclude this deal. Why should it take any longer? In fact, it should be a lot shorter. It should be concluded very quickly. And I disagree when you say that we're going through a divorce process. I think it's a pact of friendship that we're trying to forge with Europe. Thank you.
Sorry, sir, maybe I misspoke, but I was talking about the challenge the U.S. would face in negotiating a free trade agreement with the United States, or indeed any other third country with whom it currently does not have a relationship, because that is either through the EU or doesn't exist. I honestly, I don't know the answer to how we're going to go forward between the UK and the EU. A free trade agreement would be one option. I think it would be a suboptimal. Economically, it's far suboptimal to what you have now, which is full participation in the single market. But, I mean, maybe that's the maximum we can get. I understand the politics of this is going to be, as Andrew has said, the issue of free movement and other complicated. So, no, I think it will take some time for us to figure out what is the new relationship between the UK and the EU. The Article 50 negotiations, as you know, the time frame is 2 years. Frankly, I was in the Constitutional Convention when we wrote that article. And I can tell you now, 2 years was kind of, plucked out of the air, because 3 years seemed like a long time, 1 year seemed like a short time, so let's make it 2. Nobody knows. Honestly, we've never done this. It may be over in 6 months, it may take 5 years. Honestly, we don't know. Forging the new relationship has no time frame. And that's under Article 218, as you know, and it's a different procedure, and we don't know. In the first instance, respectfully, and I don't say this in any way critically of the UK has to decide what its sort of negotiating position is when it comes to Brussels to say, well, we want to leave, and this is what we'd like to put in place of being of full membership. If that were to be an FTA, I agree with you, that would not be hugely challenging to negotiate. Trust me, any trade deal takes time once you start writing it down and you start looking at words and language and legalities and numbers. And it's never quite as simple as, how many times have I been told, oh, we can do this, we can do a quick trade deal, and people 5 years later are still negotiating. It's not simple, and it's not simple for a reason, and it's not simple because people don't know how to negotiate or because people don't know how to go quickly. It's not simple because it's complicated, and there's a lot of details, and there's a lot of domestic politics on both sides of the equation that have to be settled. But I was not saying, and I didn't intend to say, forgive me if I did, that it would be hugely difficult to negotiate a free trade agreement. Frankly, I hope we can do something better than just a free trade agreement between us, but that's another issue.
Great, thanks. Final question, Toto?
Thank you, Jan. My name is Antonio López Istúriz. I'm a Spanish member of the European Parliament and Secretary General of the EPP, European People's Party. I've been advocating since the day of the referendum after that we would have the most swift, quick negotiation, because it's not about, you put it very rightly, Andrew, in your first part of your intervention, this is not time for any celebration for anyone. I think it has been hard, and it will be tough for both. I lived mini Brexit when in 2009 you decided to quit the EPP, and it was not good for the EPP and it was not good for you. That's my personal humble opinion. Years after. It was about the second part of your intervention. You spoke about the immigration, this Latino thing, north, south. I would be a little bit, in European standards, surprised by this, and I hope that this is not relating also to Europe, because this immigration rhetoric, true, we have a crisis going on in Europe. We have to deal with that. We were not coordinated. The Spanish, we were advocating for this many years because we felt the pressure, and we did our job. No one paid attention to us. No one supported us. And then everybody now runs for that. But it's not time for complaining. But we have to stop certain rhetoric, especially between us. I have 200,000 Spanish citizens living in the United Kingdom. In the future negotiations, I hope that we are thinking about them. The same way I have to think about the 1 million British citizens living in Spain. Because I could argue, or I could publicize, or my government could be tempted the next months to publicize how many millions of euros have we spent with the Spanish taxpayers' money for the healthcare system that British citizens have enjoyed for many years. I don't want to do that, Andrew. I don't want to do it. I want that we have the most reasonable, swift negotiation that will not affect neither your citizens, neither mine. So that there are no differences, and that at the end, I believe that we have a common problem, all of us, our way of living. And by the way, I have discovered this in my successive meetings in DC and these days here. Our way of living is under attack by many people that they don't like us, our way of democracy. Mm-hmm. And it's called populism also. And we are living that very hardly in Europe. So I believe that we have to be united in that and to have the most reasonable answers to our citizens. Andrew, what line do I have to take in Spain? Do I go to help these 1 million British citizens, or do I go the other way? You tell me, because I'm sure you. Most certainly, I know what you're going to tell me, but I would like to hear.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks. So maybe, Andrew, if I can, if you'll answer that, and then we can take final comments from the rest of the panelists, and then we'll need to wrap up.
Yeah. I mean, the point about a sensible discussion about migration is that if you don't do it as responsible democratic mainstream politicians, you leave the ground clear for the extremes. If you don't talk seriously about migration, about pressures, and have an open debate on the subject, however uncomfortable it can be, however difficult a subject it can be to tackle, if you don't do that as the political mainstream, then you leave the space clear for the extremes to take it on instead. So it's actually a responsible act for mainstream politicians to talk about migration and to talk about the pressures. And you're quite right to talk about the numbers of Spaniards in the country, my country, number of British people in Spain. There are a huge number of people from the United Kingdom who own properties in Florida and come and visit Florida and live in Florida. Those arrangements are managed, they're handled, and they work successfully. And you're also quite right not to get into the rhetoric about how much money is spent on the health service, because that would equally just lead to me talking about how much money British people have put into the Spanish economy, building properties, investing in the lifestyle, helping people in Spain who have jobs that look after those people who retired to Spain. So it is both important to be responsible in this subject of migration, but it's equally important not to shy away from it as mainstream politicians and leave it to the extremes, which none of us would want.
Casey, any final comments?
This has been a wonderful discussion. I think it's very interesting for those of us from the U.S. to listen to the differences on both sides. What I would say is that we have friends in the EU. We have a very strong friend in the UK. And we're going to let you guys work through this, and we want to continue to move forward on TTIP. Like I said, there are still some tough issues that we need to work through, but we are committed to getting that done, and whether the UK is a part of that or we need to pursue a separate FTA, I think that's something that Congress is very interested in doing. And when the time comes and things have been worked through, we're looking forward to moving forward with that if that's the route that we decide to go. Regardless, the U.S. is very happy to have the friends that we have in Europe. We want to continue those strong relationships from a trade perspective, from a security perspective, from an economic perspective. And we'll be here for support on both sides when you're ready.
Thanks, Casey. Pastor?
Well, just again to repeat what for me is the most fundamental issue, that the US and the EU basically created the modern trading system. We are the biggest beneficiaries from it by far. And its continued existence and development is absolutely vital for our future prosperity. And therefore, I think our joint effort is to defend trade openness, trade liberalization, with appropriate safeguards. I'm a realist about how you get this done politically at times, but keeping that momentum. We have been not able to move forward in the multilateral fora in the way we would wish. That's why we're involved in these bilateral agreements, which frankly are suboptimal from an economic perspective. Once again, multilateral trade liberalization would be better. On the other hand, you can't do things in the multilateral system, such as investment, such as regulatory cooperation, and these are things which are increasingly important in the modern trade world. It's no longer just tariffs. It's no longer just the classic service access. There are other elements which you could not do in Geneva, so to speak, and which you have to do through bilateral agreements. On Brexit and all of that, look, this is not going to be easy, but I think for me the key message is respect. Respect for the decision of the British people, respect for the political space the UK needs to figure out exactly how this should go forward, because let's be frank, there wasn't a clear plan as to what leave meant. They now have to develop that. But I think the UK also needs to show respect to the 27 of us. We have a lot of issues at stake. This is our union too, and leaving it has consequences for us, and continued uncertainty is not helpful. And if I may say so respectfully, equally, an element of competition between us at this moment, before we have decided on the future relations, is not particularly helpful either. We should try and work out how we do this in the best way, least disruptive, by the way, to the international trading environment and to our trading partners, who look on this with some concern, because it puts them in a difficult position, as we have seen in the United States. So we have a joint responsibility, the United Kingdom and the 27 of us, to try and work this through in a way that fully respects the decision of the British people, but which delivers outcomes which are in the UK's interest, the interest of the 27, and the furtherance of the transatlantic agenda.
Great. Thank you, Ambassador. So it remains to me only to say thank you again for joining us today, and thank you, Ambassador, and to the delegation of the EU in Washington for your support, for the EPLO office in Washington, to Antoine and his staff for their support. Thank you very much. We would like to invite you now to a reception which is taking place just across the hall. Right. And thank you again.
Thank you very much.